Okay, so you're getting ready to take your ACT English. This is volume 1 of some ACT English quick tips. I'm going to start with 5 items and hopefully it'll help you on each of these types of ACT questions. Let's see which ones we're going to go over. To start, we're going to look at eliminating redundancies. Second, most concise phrase. Third, what I call semicolon outliers. Fourth, affect versus effect. And 5, accept versus accept. The first thing that you need to be aware of is you need to know what the ACT English question is asking you. So if you start at the top, look where I put vertically scan. So this is a strategy where we look at the answer choices and we scan them vertically, meaning you're going to look up and down using your eyes at the answer choices before you and see what is the same and what is different. What do I mean by that? Well, you need to ask yourself, what changes? So what changes in the answer choices? Is it the punctuation? So if I scan the answer choices quickly and I see that in the middle of the answer choice option for each of them, there's a different punctuation mark, like sometimes a semicolon, sometimes a comma, sometimes a period, then I know this is a punctuation question. Now, every once in a while, the ACT will combine skills within a question, and that is one of the more difficult questions to answer typically. But very often I can narrow it down initially and find out if it's a punctuation question at all. Is it testing that skill by noticing, does the punctuation change? Finally, looking at the words themselves. So next, verb tense. Verb tense, does it change? Then it's probably testing your ability to change the tense of verbs. The number of words. Does the number of words change in the answer choices significantly? Then it's probably testing your ability to choose the most concise answer choice. Does the word order change? That can have to do with sentence construction. It can have to do with what's called a dangling modifier, but that's something I need to pay attention to. Do the words themselves change? Does the grammar change? Okay, so when I'm vertically scanning, I'm trying to figure out what is the ACT question attempting to ask me? Because unlike when you're in English class, the ACT English doesn't tell you the question. Sure, they give you some answer choices and they give you a passage that you're supposed to edit or fix, but they don't say choose the right verb tense or choose the most concise answer or choose the answer choice that eliminates redundancies. It is up to you to discover what the question is asking most of the time. And if you can do that, many times you can get it right. Because if your teacher asks you, choose the answer choice that is the least redundant, choose the one that eliminates redundancies, you would be able to do that, wouldn't you? So you need to do that for yourself. You need to become your teacher when you're taking the ACT English and find out, what is this question asking you? Let's look at the first type. So eliminating redundancies. The first thing you need to do is understand if this question is being asked of you. You need to spot the question type itself by asking, are all the answer choices grammatical? Meaning, if I look at all the answer choices and they're all grammatically correct, very often the student will choose no change as their answer. Now, no change very often is the answer. It varies what the percentage is, but it will be the answer for a number of the ACT English questions, but it isn't always. So sometimes if all the answer choices are grammatically correct, you might think, well, there's nothing wrong with it. It's no change. No, that's not the case. Typically when it's no change, there is something wrong with the other answer choices. Do you understand? So it would be no change because it's correct as it is, and to choose one of the other answer choices would actually make it wrong. Are you confused yet? Me too. So when I look at this and they're all grammatically correct, it has to be something else. And sometimes it is eliminate redundancies. Looking at the second bullet point, what are redundancies then? Redundancies, that is when you include multiple words or phrases in writing that mean the same thing. Now, when we're speaking, many times we will use redundancies, and it's not that big of a deal. But because of that, our ears are not tuned to notice redundancies in writing. This is a skill of revision. You're supposed to look at your writing and then revise out where you repeat yourself unnecessarily. But on the ACT, sometimes those repetitions are not obvious. Look at my example on the last bullet. An example from the ACT English that was a real question where you had to eliminate redundancies was 8 a.m. in the morning. 8 a.m. in the morning. How often do you say that? If you say, well, what time do you have to be at school? 8 a.m. in the morning. Okay, nobody would judge you for that, but let's look at it closely. What does a.m. indicate? It indicates that it's morning. Therefore, to include both a.m. and morning is a redundancy. So on the answer choice, the correct one would be either 8 a.m. or 8 in the morning, not both. Okay, so the point of this is we need to notice these redundancies because sometimes it's as easy as noticing that you only need to say 8 a.m. or 8 in the morning if you know what the question is asking you. Let's look at the next one. Okay, the most concise. So you might want to pause and come back to this as I go through it because I do give you some examples. Just like with eliminating redundancies, with most concise, you need to figure out what is the question asking me? So to spot the question type, ask yourself, are all the choices grammatical, but some answer choices contain fewer or more words? If they contain fewer or more words, then very often it will be testing your ability to revise or edit the phrase so that it is the most concise answer choice. However, don't fall for it. Meaning most concise doesn't always mean the shortest. So the easiest route would be, well, pick the shortest answer. It's the most concise. Concise and shortest, they don't mean the same thing. Concise means cut together. That's what that word means. Cut together. So the shortest way to say something that keeps all of the meaning still together. So it cuts it down to something shorter, but all the meaning is still there. The point is, the most concise answer choice on ACT English will not eliminate pertinent info, meaning I'm not going to make it so short that I lose some of the information. Now you might say, well, how do I decide what information is important? Well, typically, you don't want to take out any information that's part of the sentence because, again, we're not deciding what's important. Let me give you an example. So if the example on the ACT said, she teaches math at the educational institution, MIT, that is the school where students pursue college-level engineering. So again, right here, she teaches math at the educational institution, MIT, that is the school where students pursue college-level engineering. So this would be an example on ACT. And then again, they're not going to say choose the most concise answer choice. You just have to figure out what are you editing for. So the correct answer in this one would be, she teaches math at the college MIT, where many students pursue engineering. She teaches math at the college MIT, where many students pursue engineering, is the correct, most concise answer. What is incorrect, though, and that does happen to be the shortest of the answer choices, would be, she teaches math at the college MIT. Okay? So that is not the most concise because it took out this information about pursuing engineering. Do you understand? So I made it the most concise because I took out words that some redundancies and some extra verbiage that just is not necessary. So the educational institution is indicated by the fact that it's MIT and it's a college. So I can really just say college. Now I want to include the name of the college, and I want to include that it is a college because my reader might not know what MIT is. So she teaches math at the college MIT, where many students pursue engineering. So you might think, well, why is that part about engineering important? Well, let's just pretend that the rest of the passage is about engineering, and so therefore that information is relevant to introduce. The point is, most concise, you spot it when the answer choices are all grammatically correct, there isn't a lot of changing punctuation or changing verb tenses or changing word order, but they look like some answer choices are shorter than the others. Then you're probably being tested on most concise, but make sure to choose the one that is the shortest and includes all the information, not just the one that's the shortest, period. Next. Speaking of periods, let's look at semicolons. So you might say, well, that's not really a period. No, it's not, but you know what it is? It's a comma with a period on top. That's what I like to refer to it as. So let's look at why. So first of all, what's an outlier? An outlier is something that's outside of the norm. And so if you studied semicolons, you probably know that you can use semicolons to connect independent clauses. And if you don't know that, I will I will put out another video later that talks more about semicolons specifically. But quickly, I wanted to point out to you these other ways that you can use a semicolon that are pretty unusual. And this is where the higher level ACT score can be achieved by noticing questions like these. Maybe there's only one question on this, but if you can get it right, it can bump you up higher. So this is looking at an outlier, or a different way of using a semicolon that is tested on the ACT is the semicolon as a super comma. So I introduce this as number 1, the super comma in a series of items containing commas already, and number 2, the compound complex syntactical acrobatic super comma, which is my way of saying sometimes a semicolon is needed when the writer is very fancy. So let's look. Number 1, super comma in a series of items containing commas already. So this is where I actually need an additional punctuation mark to separate items in a series that already have commas. So let's take a look at my sentence. I say, my friends live in Seattle, Washington, San Francisco, California, Nashville, Tennessee, Atlanta, Georgia, New York, New York, Chicago, Illinois, Daytona, Florida, and Etowah, Tennessee. Okay, so looking at that, because of the grammatical convention that a comma is needed to separate a city and a state, or a town and a state name, I can't use all commas if I'm listing those sets of places that already have commas in them. If I did, then I would be telling my reader to pause the same amount of time, and so my sentence would completely change and it would sound like this. My friends live in Seattle, Washington, San Francisco, California, Nashville, Tennessee, Atlanta, Georgia. Do you see where I'm going with this? It makes it sound like these are each separate places, but instead they're a place that has a comma in it. Another way this happens a lot is with birthdays. So if I say, my siblings were born April 18th, 1980, September 12th, 1984, and then I list another date. So, but obviously those dates have commas in them already, and I need something else to separate them. There comes the semicolon. So the semicolon is what we can use to separate items that already have a comma. So Seattle, Washington already has a comma, so then I just put a semicolon right there, and it makes it separated, and it indicates that it is one item. So Seattle, Washington is one item, not Seattle and Washington being two separate items. Okay, let's look at how this can be used otherwise. So this can also be used with when I have a sentence, when I have a sentence that again has commas in it already and conjunctions, but I want to keep it as one sentence. So just follow along with me. The morning started terribly. She was startled awake for an hour by the racket of her sister's 17 alarms that went off incrementally every 5 minutes like a chorus of nagging mothers whose mission is to torture their children awake and enjoy doing it. The sound of the neighbor's dogs who snarled, snapped, and yipped competitively. Her little brother's marathon session of that one Sonic the Hedgehog level he couldn't beat. And the roommate herself who snored through it all obliviously. So if you take a look at this sentence, I have separated the dependent clauses with a semicolon. And if you know anything about semicolons, you know that that would in most cases be incorrect, because we use a semicolon to separate independent clauses, but these are dependent, so why did I use a semicolon? Well, if you look, one of my items in the series says, the sound of the neighbor's dogs who snarled, snapped, and yipped competitively. So just like this example, one of the items has commas in it already. Because it has commas in it already, I need to use semicolons to separate those dependent clauses when they're all stacked together like that, even if just one has commas already in it. Now, this is not going to occur very often, but it can occur, which is why I wanted you to note it. But if you look again, the reason students get this wrong is right here, where we see the semicolon in front of the conjunction before the last item in the series of the dependent clauses. A student knows or should know that we don't put semicolons in front of coordinating conjunctions. So if we use a coordinating conjunction to attach two independent clauses, it needs to have a comma in front of it, not a semicolon. So in most cases you would see that and be like, oh, that's wrong. Well, in this case it's not wrong because I've used them in a series. Now that's a lot, so if that was very confusing to you, probably you should go back and pause the video and watch it again and look at the example, and let me know if you have any questions. So let's look then at the next. So affect versus effect. So this is one of those commonly misused words questions that comes up a lot, and this also comes up a lot in student writing. So if you can get this correct, you will really impress everybody, because even a lot of adults still mix this up. But I actually have a tip for remembering it. It's a trick, kind of. So the first thing that's not a trick is you need to know that affect is a verb with one exception. So it's usually a verb. Effect is a noun, okay? So effect is a noun, it's a thing. Affect is a verb, it's an action, it does something. So let's take a look at what I mean. The medicine affected me by making me drowsy, she told her psychiatrist plainly. So she says, I don't want to take this medicine, it affected me by making me drowsy. And I'm over enunciating the A on purpose, so you hear it affected me. Okay? He wrote down depression, flat affect. So this is the exception, the one exception, because on ACT English, sometimes those vocabulary questions, they will use a definition of the word that if you look in the dictionary, it's like number 6 or 7 down. It's like not a common use of the word. So affect can actually be used to describe like the tone of someone's voice indicating their mood. And the only people who really use that is psychologists, but it is a thing. So in most cases, though, if you affect someone, it's a verb. It's spelled with an A. But here, if I have a flat affect, it's a different thing. And it just means I'm speaking like in a monotone way, in an unemotional way. I don't have any emotional inflection. Okay, now effect, in contrast, is always a noun. So the cause and effect, the thing. So the medicine's side effect, it made her drowsy. This affected her ability to stay awake. So if you can remember this, I always teach this using the example of medicine, because we have how it affects us and what the effect is. So the medicine affects you by making you tired. The effect is you're tired. If you can remember that and keep that straight, then just plug that example in whenever you see affect or effect in a question, or if you're trying to use it in your own writing, so that you'll be able to remember that if it affects you, it's with an A, right? Because it's a verb, it's doing something. But the effect is the thing that happens, all right? So if you're nice to me, that's going to affect me by making me happy. And the effect is I'm going to be happy that you're being nice. You get it? All right, next. Finally, the last one. So here is another commonly misused word that I have a trick. So it's like a set of words that people mix up all the time, and in the grand scheme of things, it's really like if you can get it right, you will impress people. And in college, you want to get it right to be at the level that you need to be at. But on the ACT, it can matter because it can make a difference in your point. So you can raise a point just by getting this question right. So accept versus accept. Let's take a look. So accept means to include. And I always tell students the word even sounds round and accepting. So it has the A, which is round, like a hug, right? I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's like a hug. It's like, I accept you, okay? Accept is to cut out. So the word even sounds cutting. An example that includes both is, I accept all of your candy except the Skittles. You can give those to your ex. Cut them out of your life already, okay? Do you get it? So, accept. Like an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend. Accept. I like everyone except them. I like all candy except the Skittles. I accept all the other candy. I accept it except the Skittles. If you can remember that silly trick, it might help you get one more point on the ACT if the accept question appears. Now, the thing about the commonly misused words is that it's really a gamble, meaning that sometimes you'll see accept versus accept on the ACT, and sometimes you will see affect versus effect, and other times you'll see stationary versus stationary, or principal versus principal. So you do want to look at this list, look at an entire list of commonly misused words, but I wanted to go over the two that I see appear very often and that students very often mess up, but it's easy to remember if you just remember my simple tricks. So stay tuned for the next volume where I will give you 5 more, and good luck on your ACT English.